Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are opening a document that takes a concept most of us, associate with espionage and digital sabotage.
Cyber warfare.
Exactly, cyber warfare. And it weaponizes it against, of all things, predatory lending.
It's an incredible document. We're looking at a strategic operational blueprint.
Right.
I mean, it reads like a detailed manual for war.
Right. But the war is fought entirely with publicly available information, regulatory filings, forensic financial analysis, no hacking involved.
That's the perfect setup. We're analyzing an operational framework called Operation Clean Sweep.
Yeah.
And it was authored by Gerard King.
Okay.
And what makes this document so fascinating is that it's an adversary emulation directive. It completely co-opts the structured methodology that cybersecurity pros use.
Specifically, the ADVERSARY framework.
Precisely.
Okay.
And it applies that rigorous tactical playbook to what they call an information operation, or an IO.
So it treats systemic financial fraud?
Exactly like a sophisticated, persistent network threat.
Yes. Okay. Let's unpack that core idea. The ADVERSARY framework, for those of you who might be unfamiliar, is it's essentially a global knowledge base.
Right. Of known adversary tactics and techniques. They all have these T codes.
And security teams use it to understand how an attacker operates. But here, they're not protecting a network at all.
No, they're using the attacker's own logic to dismantle a financial market.
So what does the mission overview say? What's the goal?
It lays it out very clearly. The mission is the successful, non-destructive emulation of a sophisticated state-level threat actor.
And they even give it a name, a placeholder name.
APTK. And this actor is focused entirely on achieving maximum information disruption, regulatory exposure, and public transparency.
So it's a structured approach to activism where every single step's predefined, it's measurable, and it's mapped to a known adversarial technique.
Absolutely.
Well, what's the ultimate objective here? The payload, so to speak, for this entire operation. It's not just about exposing a few bad actors, is it?
No, the goal is total eradication. The directive calls for the complete dismantling of predatory financial practices within this specific target sector.
And this is focused on Ontario and then Canada more broadly.
First Ontario, then the goal is to expand it nationally. And it's meant to happen via irreversible legislative action and a consumer-driven market correction.
So this is a calculated, full-spectrum takedown.
It is, and the planning is documented right down to the specific regulatory submission codes they'll use. It's incredibly detailed.
So who exactly is the target of this extraordinary effort?
The directive calls them predatory powersports subprime lending entities, or PPSLEs for short.
PPSLEs. So we're talking about the finance companies and the dealer networks that specialize in loans for things like ATVs, snowmobiles,
personal watercraft, other recreational vehicles, and specifically lending to high-risk consumers for those items.
The document is really rigorous in how it defines the adversary, though, isn't it?
Oh, extremely. They are not targeting all subprime lenders, only those that meet a very specific and very strict set of criteria.
So the PPSLE definition is based entirely on observable systemic predatory behavior.
That's right. They have to be engaging in 4 core practices simultaneously for them to be considered a target.
Okay, let's define those 4 key practices, because this is where the real human element of the harm becomes so clear.
Right. So number 1, excessive interest rates.
And these rates are often layered in complex ways, I assume, to make the true cost of borrowing really opaque.
That's the key. The stated rate might be, say, 29.9%, but when you compound that with mandatory insurance products and origination fees,
the actual cost of the loan might push well beyond what the consumer could ever reasonably manage.
Exactly. It's designed to be confusing.
And practice number 2 is non-transparent fee structures,
which is tied directly to the first point. It refers to the layering of those mandatory, often unnecessary fees that obscure the total effective interest rate.
So the documents themselves are designed to confuse.
The whole point is to make it nearly impossible for a regular person to calculate the actual APR at the point of sale. The predatory nature isn't just the high rate.
It's the act of deception surrounding the rate.
Yes, it's the core of it.
The third practice then goes straight to the asset itself. Aggressive repossession tactics.
This is critical. These entities are known for highly aggressive, very rapid repossession of the assets.
The ATV, the boat, the snowmobile.
Right. And it often follows just a single missed payment.
Wow.
And critically, the debt often remains even after the asset is seized and sold off.
So you lose the vehicle, but you still owe them money.
You're left without the collateral, and you're still obligated to pay the rest of the loan. They basically monetize both the loan and the default.
That's just brutal. And finally, practice number 4.
Exploitative loan restructuring.
And this targets people who are already in trouble.
Specifically, it targets high-risk consumers who are already struggling. When a borrower says they can't make payments anymore, instead of negotiating a sustainable plan.
They offer a restructure.
Right, but one that includes massive new fees, extends the loan term even further, and capitalizes all the unpaid interest.
So it just guarantees failure down the road.
It guarantees failure, but it ensures the lender maximizes all their fee and interest collection before the inevitable repossession happens.
It sounds like Operation Clean Sweep is essentially identifying the business model kill chain of this financial harm first.
Yes.
And then building the operational attack plan to target the structural weak points of that model.
That's the strategic genius of it. They identify that these PPSLEs, for all their aggressive behavior, have critical structural weaknesses outside of their IT network.
And the operation targets what they call the critical infrastructure focus areas, or CIFAs.
Right. And these aren't servers or firewalls. They're the vulnerable parts of the corporate machine that expose them to regulatory failure.
So what are these key focus areas that the operation hones in on?
There are 3 main ones. First, regulatory compliance filings.
The paper trail.
That's where the paper trail exists. They're specifically looking for exploitable data on interest rate caps, truth in lending disclosure failures, mandated reporting gaps.
If they violate the paperwork, they violate the law. Simple as that.
Simple as that.
Second SEPA.
The public digital footprint. This involves exposing the associated corporate networks and the true, often complicated ownership structures.
Because they often hide the ultimate beneficial owners behind layers of shell companies.
Exactly. And exposing that leads directly to legal liability for the principals involved.
And the third SEPA, this one sounds a bit more like traditional reconnaissance, but it's aimed at consumer exposure.
That's consumer data leakage vectors. So this simulates the exploitation of things like public review sites, unprotected social media channels, unsecured contact forms on dealer websites.
And what's the goal there?
The target here is evidence of poor data hygiene. And that adds another layer of regulatory failure privacy law violations on top of the existing financial abuses.
So they're targeting the paperwork and the public interfaces.
Because that is where the non-destructive, legally admissible evidence is just inevitably located.
This is why we get to the core framework of the operation, though. The rules of engagement. They call them the model boundary conditions, or MBCs.
The MBCs, yes.
This seems to be the legal firewall that distinguishes this entire operation from just a criminal hacking campaign. What makes these rules so strict?
The MBCs are paramount. I mean, they're the ethical and legal foundation of the entire strategy. MBC 1 sets the scope.
Yeah, which is PPSLEs in Ontario extending to national Canadian regulation.
Right. They're not wasting resources on international targets. This is very provincially and federally targeted.
And MBC 2 defines the methodology.
And it is strictly non-destructive information operations, or IO, focused entirely on exposing regulatory failure.
This is so crucial for the operation's legitimacy.
It is. They are generating actionable intelligence. They are not inflicting damage or interfering with service delivery other than, what's necessary to expose public information.
The third condition, MBC 3, defines the data source. And this is arguably the most challenging constraint because it really limits the universe of accessible information.
It does. It mandates strict confinement to publicly available data, open source intelligence, OSINT, public registries like corporate filings and court documents, and consumer review websites.
And the document emphasizes this pretty heavily.
Oh yeah, it says in bold. No active penetration testing or unauthorized access to production systems is permitted.
They have to prove systemic fraud using only the breadcrumbs the PPSLEs carelessly leave in public.
That's the challenge.
That seems like a massive constraint, though, given the scale of the objective. Are they confident that OSINT alone can actually generate a successful takedown?
The document provides what they call an emulation confidence score, or ECS, of 98.5% on adhering to those MBCs.
That's incredibly high.
It is. And that confidence level is rooted in the belief that the necessary evidence, the statistical proof of predatory intent, it already exists in the public domain. It's just fragmented and disorganized.
So their job isn't to create new evidence.
No. Their job is to find it, synthesize it, and then weaponize that existing public information into a single, overwhelming legal and regulatory package.
They're literally building a multi-jurisdictional legal case using a cyber tactical playbook.
That's it in a nutshell.
That brings us to the operational phase then. Mapping the financial takedown to the MITRE AT&CK kill chain. This is really the structural core of Operation Clean Sweep.
It is. This is where the security tactics are repurposed as regulatory maneuvers.
This part really provides the aha moment, I think, for how two seemingly disparate fields can cross-pollinate their strategies.
Absolutely. The operation follows a 7-phase adversary kill chain, and it's meticulously mapped to specific MITRE T codes.
And we start with Phase A intelligence gathering.
Or reconnaissance, which is TA00043. In a typical network attack, this is when you'd scan ports and look for open vulnerabilities.
But here you are performing corporate and regulatory scouting.
Sure.
So if I'm a sophisticated threat actor, like this APTK, how do I scout a predatory financial entity in Canada?
They start with T1590. Gather victim identity information. This is fundamental.
You can't sue or regulate an anonymous entity.
Right. The first step is identifying the key directors, the principals, the beneficial owners. And they do that via corporate registry searches, like the Ontario Business Registry.
So this establishes the chain of responsibility and ownership.
It maps the human network and the organizational structure. The goal is to identify the point of legal accountability rather than just identifying a user account on a server.
Okay, next is T1592. Gather victim network information, but the document says this is simulated. What are they looking for when they map the public-facing surface area?
They map the DNS and IP ranges associated with the PPSLES dealer networks. They're looking for the scale of the public footprint.
So this isn't preparation for a hack.
No, not at all. It's about identifying the sheer number of publicly accessible web properties, like dealer contact forms or loan pre-approval pages.
That might serve as vectors for information leakage, or, critically, serve as points for simulated mass data injection later on in the plan.
Exactly. It's all about scoping the public liability exposure.
That makes perfect sense. They are looking for the structural vulnerability, which, in this context, is just the sheer volume of public interaction points.
Precisely. And then they move to T1598, phishing for information. Again, this is simulated and strictly non-malicious.
What does simulated financial phishing even look like under these strict constraints?
It involves crafting highly realistic but non-malicious consumer survey forms.
And these are only deployed in a controlled test environment, right? They're never targeting real PPSLE systems.
Never. The goal is to determine the granularity of personal data requested before a formal loan application is even submitted.
And what information does that yield? What's the point?
The objective is to gather evidence that the PPSLEs are habitually over-collecting sensitive PII unnecessarily.
Things like detailed income breakdowns, maybe health status details, banking information.
All of that, even when a potential loan decision hasn't been made.
And this excessive collection can then be used in regulatory complaints about data hygiene and systemic privacy failures.
Exactly. It gives the activist another potent regulatory lever to pull, right alongside the primary financial complaints.
But all that scouting data is useless unless they have a weapon to apply it with. That brings us to the R&D lab of Operation Clean Sweep, Resource Development, TA0002.
Yes, this is where the key analytical tool is built.
This is the critical R&D focus under T587, Develop Capabilities.
It is. The source document mandates the creation of a sophisticated financial analysis tool. It's even specified as Python WASM compliant for portability and verifiability.
And it's designed specifically to calculate the total effective interest rates, or TIR, for these PPSLE contracts.
That's its only job.
Can you explain TIR simply? Why is this calculator the central weapon of the whole operation?
Well, think of it this way. A lender might tell you, the borrower, that the interest rate is 20%. But then they tack on a mandatory credit insurance premium, a loan administration fee, a processing fee, a dealer markup.
And all of that gets folded into the principal or financed over the life of the loan.
Exactly. The TIR tool cuts through all of those non-transparent fee structures to calculate the actual true annual cost of borrowing expressed as a percentage.
So it reveals the hidden cost that these predatory practices rely on to evade usury laws or consumer protection thresholds.
That's it. And by automating the calculation of TIR across hundreds of contracts, they can generate statistically irrefutable proof of predatory intent.
So they're building a bespoke fraud detection mechanism that standard compliance checks often miss because those checks only look at the base interest rate.
Precisely. And once that weapon, the TIR tool, is finalized and validated, it needs to be staged. That's T1608, stage capabilities.
So what does staging mean in this context?
It means preparing the public repository of consumer testimonies, along with the initial regulatory analysis derived from the tier tool, for immediate high-impact release.
It's getting all your ducks in a row.
Staging means ensuring the evidence is organized, notarized, or time-stamped, verified by internal analysis, and ready for simultaneous distribution across multiple channels. It's the final prep before launch.
That structural preparation leads us directly into Phase B execution and persistence. This is the action trigger.
This is where the information payload is injected into the system to force a catastrophic, verifiable reaction from both the PPSLEs and the regulators.
We begin with initial access, TA0001. Since they can't breach a network, they access the information sphere via public channels and, well, trust manipulation.
Yes, T1199. Trusted relationship simulated involves emulating the role of a legitimate consumer advocacy group.
What's the purpose of that simulation? Why pretend to be an advocacy group?
By posing as a consumer rights advocate, they can gain access to the PPSLE's standard public relations materials and their standardized response protocols.
So this isn't malicious, it's more intelligence gathering.
Pure intelligence gathering. It helps them understand how the PPSLEs defend themselves publicly, which allows the operation to preemptively draft counter-narratives and anticipate the PPSLE's legal defense strategies once the report drops.
And this leads to what I think is maybe the most conceptually brilliant tactic in the entire document. T566, phishing simulated consumer.
It's amazing.
It results in a non-destructive denial of service attack simulation.
It's a DOS attack via legitimate, high-volume consumer queries. The operation simulates a mass public disclosure of high-tier contracts.
So they might publish samples or run a simple online calculator for people to use.
Exactly. And that intentionally drives a massive consumer-initiated contact search. Hundreds or even thousands of real, legitimate consumers, now armed with evidence of these high hidden rates, flood the PPSLE service channels.
With inquiries, complaints, requests for contract clarity.
With it.
Wait, let me just challenge this for a second. Hundreds of legitimate complaints flooding a customer service line. I mean, that sounds cripplingly expensive for the company.
It is.
Is there any risk that the activists themselves could be sued for market interference or harassment, even if the individual consumer complaints are genuine?
That's why the MBCs are so strict. The operation itself doesn't initiate the flood of calls. It simply provides the verified public information, the tier analysis, that drives the consumers to act on their own behalf.
So the PPSLEs would have no legal standing to sue for harassment?
None. They're simply receiving a high volume of legitimate consumer inquiries based on publicly accessible facts. It creates immediate operational stress and forces a diversion of resources away from counter-IO or legal defense.
So it's effectively generating an actionable volume attack without breaking a single law.
That's the beauty of it.
The true trigger, however, happens in the execution phase, TA0002. This is where the statistical proof meets the regulators.
Yes, T1059. Command scripting interpreter, but they've relabeled it financial model.
Which is the functional execution of their tier analysis tool, T587.
The analysis is run against hundreds of publicly available mock loan structures and anonymized OSINT data. And this generates overwhelming statistical proof that the predatory practices are systemic, consistent, and intentional.
Not just isolated errors or a few bad dealer mistakes.
Absolutely not. This statistical weight is then packaged for T1204, user execution regulatory.
And this is the core action.
This is the trigger. The compiled statistical proof, what they call the Consolidated Report of Findings, or CROF, is formally submitted to mandated regulatory bodies.
And this targets two crucial Canadian entities. The Financial Services Regulatory Authority, FSRA,
which oversees provincial licensing and compliance,
and the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, OSFI,
which oversees the broader stability of the financial system and federal rules.
Why is hitting both the provincial level with FSRA and the federal level with OSFI so crucial?
Well, hitting FSRA is how you get their license revoked in Ontario. That immediately halts their ability to operate locally. Hitting OSFI elevates the issue to systemic financial risk. which is far more serious. That can trigger action against the major financial institutions that underwrite or fund these subprime products in the first place.
And the document explicitly identifies this dual action, the formal, documented submission of proof, as the primary trigger for legislative impact.
This is the central pillar of the entire execution phase.
Once that submission is made, the operation enters the persistence phase, TA0003. The evidence has to be non-revocable. It can't be suppressed.
Right. And this is addressed by T5547 boot or logon auto-start execution, which they've mapped to public archive.
What does that mean in practice?
It means maintaining a mirrored, public-facing archive of all the submitted regulatory complaints and financial analyses. And this data is hosted on multiple non-PPSLE controlled platforms.
So decentralized storage, public GitHub or GitLab repositories, secured cloud environments.
All of the above.
This sounds like digital redundancy, but it's being applied to litigation risk.
Exactly. Think of it like this. If you have a critical legal document, you don't just keep one copy in your house. You notarize multiple copies and store them with your lawyer in a bank vault, maybe with a trusted friend in another city.
So if the PPSLEs attempt to use legal injunctions to force the removal of evidence from one host,
the decentralized nature ensures non-revocable evidence exists immediately, forcing them to fight a war on dozens of fronts at the same time.
And the directive also includes T0136, create account. This uses pseudonym accounts to continuously monitor the PPSLE's regulatory and public responses.
Yes, ensuring that the operation can respond quickly to any counter-narrative. It's all about maintaining sustained pressure.
Okay, Phase C focuses on disruption and impact, but it's framed in legal terms, elevating the legal stakes and making the evidence entirely bulletproof against any challenge. Let's start with privilege escalation, TA0004.
Privilege escalation here means shifting the regulatory ground from a minor offense to a systemic crisis. Key to 168. Exploitation for privilege escalation or legal precedent is the key tactic.
And the framework mandates leveraging specific Canadian common law and provincial statutes, like the Ontario Consumer Protection Act, 2002.
That's the main one.
But is leveraging provincial law truly a hack? Or is that just smart legal work dressed up in cyber language for the document?
I think it's the structured application of leverage that makes it a hack. A typical lender audit might result in a fine for poor disclosure or misconduct.
A slap on the wrist.
That's all it is. Privilege escalation in this context means using the documented systemic nature of the abuse, the tier analysis, to argue that the PPSLEs have committed systemic regulatory failure or unconscionable practices under the CPA.
And that distinction is critical.
It's critical because it triggers mandatory severe penalties like license revocation or eligibility for massive class action lawsuits, which a simple fine would never ever achieve.
They turn statistical patterns into a legal battering ram.
That's a great way to put it.
This is immediately followed by defense evasion, TA00005.
Defense evasion is all about anticipating and neutralizing the target's counterattack. The tactic here is T1497, virtualization sandbox evasion, which they've mapped to legal redaction.
So the operation mandates the preemptive, meticulous redaction of all consumer personally identifiable information, or PII.
From every single public disclosure, testimony, and court filing. Everything.
Why is that considered evasion? Isn't that just good privacy practice?
It is, but it's also a strategic move to remove the PPSLE's primary plausible counter-IO strategy.
I see.
If the PPSLE's lawyers can't attack the facts of the predation, their next move is always to sue the activist for privacy violations or unauthorized data dissemination. It turns the legal focus away from their own misconduct.
So by redacting the PII, the activists remove that entire line of defense.
It forces the PPSLEs to address the core regulatory breaches based on the statistical evidence. They are preemptively removing the target's legal sandbox to force a direct fight on the merits of the case.
They also include tactics under credential access, TA0006, not to steal passwords, obviously, but to undermine their overall corporate credibility.
Exactly. And while they adhere strictly to the MBCs of no active access, T1552, unsecured credentials, simulated, involves exposing poor security hygiene discovered purely through OSINT.
For instance, if a dealer network reuses the same simple password on their website, their public social media, and their business registration login.
Right. The goal is not to exploit that weakness, but to illustrate a profoundly poor security and data handling posture. This further supports the regulatory case that the PPSLEs are unfit to operate and simply cannot be trusted with sensitive consumer data.
And then there's T155 adversary in the middle, but for IO and transparency. How do they simulate a man-in-the-middle attack using only OSINT?
This is pure transparency weaponization. It involves intercepting, or really just aggregating and publishing, the content of generic PPSLE customer service responses.
Public chat logs or standard email scripts found through public forums.
Any of that. The purpose is to highlight the predatory justification language used internally to defend all the excessive fees.
It sounds like publishing the script they tell their frontline employees to use.
That's exactly what it is. When their internal, predictable attempts to justify excessive fees or aggressive repossession are publicly documented and exposed, their corporate credibility is just wiped out instantly. It shows a coordinated, systemic justification for the misconduct.
Finally, Phase C includes discovery, TA00007, which is about mapping the full corporate ecosystem.
Yes, T10016, System Network Configuration Discovery, Dealer Network. This means mapping the complex intercorporate relationships between the financing companies and their preferred dealer networks.
And this is critical for establishing a cohesive, actionable conspiracy structure for the regulators.
Absolutely. If you could show the dealers and the financiers are operating as a single coordinated profit-sharing entity engaged in systemic fraud, you break the legal firewall that so often protects dealer principals from liability.
It makes it a cartel, not just a collection of bad actors.
That's the legal goal.
And they complement that with T1083, file and directory discovery,
which is the systematic cataloging and deep text analysis of all public-facing documents, PDFs, press releases, terms and conditions across all the PPSLE web properties.
What are they looking for?
They are hunting specifically for embedded predatory clauses in the fine print. This deep text analysis confirms consistency, which is vital for proving the behavior isn't random or isolated, but is a deliberate, written-in-stone corporate policy.
We've covered the intelligence gathering, the execution, and the legal elevation of the findings. Now we turn to Section 3, Action on Objective. This is the final step for ensuring irreversible impact.
Right. This is the massive simultaneous public release of the Consolidated Report of Findings, or CROF, and the active defense of that information.
This is the dissemination phase, where the volume and velocity of the information become weapons in themselves.
Let's look at lateral movement, TA0008. In cyber terms, that means moving inside a network. Here, it's about moving the information into the high credibility public sphere for independent verification.
The core tactic here is T5570, lateral tool transfer, IO.
This involves distributing the core weapon, the validated tier analysis tool from T5587 and its underlying methodology, to key media contacts, investigative journalists, and respected financial experts.
Why give the analytical tool away? Why not just keep the proprietary analysis internal to the operation?
Credibility. 100% credibility. If journalists or financial analysts can run the exact same numbers using the exact same formula against publicly available contract samples, and they confirm the massive, hidden, effective interest rates.
The evidence moves from a claim made by an activist group to an independently verified, irrefutable fact reported by the press.
Precisely. This third-party verification is crucial for achieving what the document calls high signal saturation for success.
And this entire process is supported by T1005, data from local system or consumer submissions.
Right. This is where thousands of anonymized consumer complaints are aggregated from public forums and legal databases. It provides the necessary human narrative to go alongside the cold statistical proof generated by the tier tool.
Next is exfiltration, TA000 NAR, irreversible disclosure. This is the moment the information leaves the control of the operation for good.
And it's injected into the legal and public ecosystems. They use two distinct channels here.
The first is T10041, exfiltration over C2 channel or secure IO.
This involves using encrypted, non-attributable channels to deliver the consolidated report of findings to designated regulatory and legislative endpoints.
Specifically, the offices of OSFI and provincial and federal MP and MPP offices?
Yes. This ensures the government bodies receive the reports securely, formally, and with undeniable time-stamped proof of delivery.
So that's the official channel, but they need immediate public pressure for those regulatory bodies to actually act.
That's T1048, exfiltration over alternative protocol or public dissemination.
Which means publishing the CROF simultaneously via public, high-readership platforms, news outlets, syndicated reports, high-traffic consumer forums.
This dual-channel approach secures delivery to regulators, Plus, simultaneous public publishing ensures both legal visibility and immediate widespread consumer awareness. It maximizes the impact velocity.
The regulators can't just quietly dismiss a document that is already making national news.
They'd have a very hard time doing that.
Command and Control, TI 000111, then focuses on maintaining control over the narrative once that information is out in the wild.
It's a sustained information campaign,
Yeah.
T1071. Application layer protocol, which they map to social media and press, leverages press release distribution and targeted social media campaigns to continuously re-inject the CROF data into the public discourse.
So they don't just release the information once and hope it sticks.
No, they manage the follow-up narrative and ensure the findings remain front-page news for as long as possible.
And furthermore, T156-7, exfiltration over web service is used for data preservation,
which utilizes cloud storage providers to ensure permanent, distributed backups of all the data. This is the continuous maintenance of the non-revocable evidence we discussed earlier. It protects the evidence base for the inevitable litigation that will follow.
Okay, we now arrive at the ultimate objective, impact. TA0040, or what the document calls the mandatory market correction. What are the final non-negotiable goals that constitute success here?
The goals are absolute and structurally destructive to the PPSLE business model. The first is T1561, disk wipe.
Which is simulated, of course. Here it's mapped to corporate reputation.
Right. It means effectively wiping the PPSLE's corporate reputations.
Mm-hmm.
They disseminate irrefutable proof of predatory behavior to all major Canadian financial media outlets. Their reputation and trustworthiness are destroyed.
To the point where they can't acquire new customers or defend their practices publicly.
Exactly.
And the second major goal, T1498, external remote services, which they call regulatory takeover.
This means triggering mandatory regulatory intervention, specifically receivership or outright license revocation.
And they do that by presenting such overwhelming evidence that the PPSLEs are deemed structurally incapable of operating within legal or ethical parameters.
And that forces a governmental takeover of the entity's assets and accounts.
But the primary impact vector, the one the document stresses the most, is identified as T1489, service stop, or market capital contraction. Why is cutting off the financial tap more important than reputation damage or license revocation?
Because without funding, the operation immediately ceases to exist. The PPSLEs are driven entirely by liquidity, the ability to issue new loans and pay their own existing debts.
And T1489 is designed to force their major financial backers,
The banks, the pension funds, the capital markets,
to immediately cease funding them.
the documented regulatory risk and liability exposure must be so massive that the capital markets instantly divorce themselves from the entity, starving it of the cash flow it needs to function.
It's the ultimate financial kill switch. And it's faster than waiting for a court verdict.
Much, much faster.
This entire sophisticated operation is measured by a unique quantitative metric, probabilistic risk contouring, or PRC.
Yes.
This is not about counting successful data retrievals. It's a predictive measure of mission success against the final objective.
That's right. The directive defines the success formula mathematically. PRC success equals the probability of regulatory success times the magnitude of market disruption minus the probability of a successful defensive counter IO.
So they are rigorously quantifying the risk and reward of the entire operation before a single piece of paper is even filed.
They're trying to leave nothing to chance.
And the ultimate goal for Operation Clean Sweep is to achieve a PRC success value of greater than or equal to 0.90.
Right. A 90% chance of success.
The document states that the initial calculation yields a value of 0.855. Now, that's extremely high for a complex operation like this. What's the rationale for that high starting score?
The document dedicates a specific section, Table 7.1, to justifying these high confidence inputs. They assign a probability of regulatory success of 0.90.
Arguing that the volume and consistency of the evidence is just too great to ignore.
Yes, that it directly violates multiple sections of the Consumer Protection Act. The magnitude of market disruption is set even higher at 0.95, based on the assumption that forced capital divestment will instantly halt operations.
That the financial kill switch will work immediately.
Right.
And crucially, the probability of a successful defensive counter IO by the PPSLEs is set at only 0.05. That's a very low expectation for a counterattack.
It speaks to the perceived weaknesses of the PPSLEs themselves. The framework assumes that these predatory actors prioritize profit and operational complexity over legal preparedness and media resilience.
They lack the sophisticated legal or PR capability to successfully counter documented, irrefutable facts.
Especially statistical analysis that has been independently verified by the media. They simply aren't built for a long-term information war fought by legal experts using cyber playbooks.
However, they're short of their 0.90 mandate. This small delta, 0.045, points to the existence of an unsolved variable, or a UV, that requires immediate final R&D before execution can be triggered.
Yes, and this is where they focus their remaining energy. The directive states that the primary UV that needs to be zeroed out to achieve the mandated PRC of 0.90 is the need to investigate the exact securitization vehicle used by PPSLEs to offload their loans.
Okay, we need a simple explanation here. What exactly is a securitization vehicle, and why is knowing the exact one so crucial for the final takedown?
So a securitization vehicle is essentially a financial structure, often a special trust, that bundles thousands of individual loans like mortgages, or in this case, risky powersports loans.
And then sells them as tradable securities like bonds to institutional investors around the world.
That's it. It's how the PPSLEs move risk off their own balance sheet and bring in massive amounts of fresh capital. They don't hold the risk themselves, they pass it on to others.
So if the PPSLEs are the public face of the operation, the securitization vehicle is the ultimate source of their funding.
Exactly. To successfully trigger that divestment phase, T1489, precisely, they need to know the specific name and structure of this trust or pool of assets.
And if they can pinpoint that structure,
they can target the information operation directly at the institutional investors who are buying that specific financial product. The pension funds, the banks, the hedge funds.
So if the activists can show those massive institutional investors that they are holding bonds backed by demonstrably illegal, predatory, and regulatory non-compliant debt,
it ensures an instantaneous funding freeze. The goal is to make the entire capital structure collapse, rather than just waiting for the corporate reputation to slowly bleed out.
That takes the financial kill switch from a generalized target to a laser-guided missile.
It minimizes the margin of error, that 0.045 delta, by guaranteeing the maximum magnitude of market disruption. The mission status is therefore framework validated. Execution pending final UV mitigation.
They are ready to pull the trigger as soon as they finish the R&D on that securitization structure.
That's the last piece of the puzzle.
The document also lists tactical lessons learned, highlighting two core operational needs derived from the simulation phase: high signal saturation and non-repudiation.
High signal saturation is the necessity of simultaneous public disclosure across multiple channels, regulatory, media, social media, to prevent the PPSLEs from containing or neutralizing the narrative.
You have to hit them everywhere at once with such a high volume that the story just cannot be contained.
Exactly.
And finally, non-repudiation. Now, this is a technical term that must have a clear legal meaning here.
It does. Non-repudiation simply means that every single piece of evidence, especially the consumer complaints and the statistical output from the tier tool, must be notarized, cryptographically signed, or publicly time-stamped via immutable ledgers.
And this is the final safeguard.
It is. It's to ensure that if this evidence ever ends up in court, the PPSLEs cannot truthfully claim the data was forged, manipulated, or altered in any way. It's the technical assurance that the evidence is legally bulletproof.
So what does this all mean for the future? Operation Clean Sweep isn't just a document about finance. It's a blueprint for highly structured, measurable activism.
It is. The final mandate is clear. Eliminate the PPSLE ecosystem by removing their financial license to operate and simultaneously triggering maximum consumer redress via class action eligibility.
It's a stark reminder that true leverage, even against complex financial machines, often comes not from technological intrusion, but from structured data and regulatory knowledge applied with tactical precision.
We've seen playbooks for network defense for years, but seeing the MITRE ATT&CK framework applied to economic activism where documented facts are the exploit is profoundly unusual.
Operation Clean Sweep, a sophisticated strategic framework that turned a cyber attack playbook into a regulatory and public transparency tool, using documentation and OSINT instead of code to achieve a non-destructive but total mission objective.
It raises an important question for you, the listener. Considering the complexity and ruthless measurability of this framework, what does it tell us about the future of modern activism? When structured, measurable adversarial strategies are now being applied to non-technical problems like predatory finance. What new vulnerabilities are exposed in corporate bad actors?
That's a great question to end on.
It shows that the most powerful weapon isn't always a zero-day exploit, but irrefutable evidence, packaged for legislative impact and delivered with the strategic rigor of a state-level threat actor.